Expectation in prayer is not wishful thinking. It's faith rooted in God's character. Wishful thinking is when we simply hope something good might happen with no real foundation, no assurance, and no confidence in who is in control. It is like throwing a coin into a fountain, whispering a desire, and hoping somehow the universe aligns in your favor. But expectation in prayer is entirely different. It is anchored in the unchanging nature of God. It flows out of the belief that God is faithful, that His promises are true, and that His character does not shift with circumstances. Expectation in prayer means that when you bring your request before God, you are not leaning on your own imagination or luck. You are leaning on the eternal consistency of the one who never fails. It's not about crossing your fingers and wishing for the best. It's about bowing your knees and knowing that the God you serve is able, willing, and trustworthy to work all things together for your good. When a believer prays with expectation, they are not merely reciting words. They are engaging in a spiritual transaction that acknowledges both the sovereignty and the goodness of God. This expectation is fueled by the knowledge of who God has revealed Himself to be: a Father who provides, a shepherd who guides, a healer who restores, and a redeemer who saves. Prayer without expectation is like planting seeds but never watering them, never waiting for the harvest. But prayer with expectation is saying, I have placed this seed in the soil of God's will, and I trust that in His timing, in His wisdom, and in His way, it will bear fruit. It is this unwavering belief that separates true faith from casual hope. Wishful thinking depends on circumstances aligning perfectly, but expectation depends on the character of God, which never changes. Expectation in prayer is also not about demanding outcomes. It's about aligning your faith with God's promises. There is a great difference between trying to bend God's hand to our own will and trusting His hand to guide us to what is best. Many times, broken hearts are left more shattered when prayer is approached with the wrong mindset, believing God must do what we say, when we say it, and how we say it. But expectation rooted in God's character understands that His ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts higher than our thoughts. This kind of expectation doesn't collapse when the answer doesn't come quickly. It doesn't give up when silence lingers. It doesn't quit when the outcome looks different than imagined. Instead, it holds steady because the confidence is not in the timeline of the answer, but in the nature of the one who hears the prayer. This is why expectation in prayer brings peace even before the answer arrives. When you trust the character of God, you can rest knowing that He is working all things together. Even the unseen, even the delays, even the detours. Expectation calms the restless heart because it declares, if God said He is faithful, then I can trust Him. If God said He will never leave me, then I am not abandoned. If God said He is a provider, then my needs will be met. If God said He is near the brokenhearted, then even in this pain, I am not alone. Wishful thinking offers temporary comfort, but expectation rooted in God's character provides unshakable confidence. It transforms the way we carry our burdens, the way we face uncertainty, and the way we rise from seasons of brokenness. The brokenhearted especially need this kind of expectation, because when your heart is fractured, when your soul feels heavy, it is easy to think your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. Pain convinces you that God has forgotten you, but expectation confronts that lie with truth. It declares that God is attentive, that He bends His ear toward the cries of His children, that He keeps every tear in a bottle, and that not a single whispered prayer goes unnoticed. Expectation empowers the brokenhearted to pray not out of desperation, but out of confidence. It transforms the prayer of, God, are you even listening? Into, God, I know you are working even when I can't see it. It strengthens the heart to keep praying, keep believing, and keep trusting, because the foundation is no longer emotion. It is God's unchanging character. Praying with expectation also changes the posture of the heart. Without expectation, prayer feels like duty, an obligation, something you check off your list. But with expectation, Prayer becomes a lifeline, a source of hope, and a place of encounter with the living God. It moves prayer from being a ritual into being a relationship. It shifts the language from empty repetition to heartfelt conversation. Expectation makes you enter prayer with open hands instead of clenched fists, because you are not trying to control the outcome. You are trusting the one who holds the outcome. And in that place of trust, the heart begins to heal, hope begins to grow, and peace begins to flow. Expectation rooted in God's character also produces endurance. When the answer delays, expectation says, "I still believe." When the situation worsens, expectation whispers, "God is still good." When the heart breaks again, expectation clings to the truth that God is close to the brokenhearted. This endurance is not willpower. It is the fruit of trusting God's nature. People who pray with expectation are not tossed around by every wave of disappointment because their anchor is set in something deeper than circumstances. They have resolved that God's word is true, that his promises are reliable, and that his character is unchanging, no matter what storms may come. This is why expectation in prayer is so transformative. It does not just change what you are praying for. It changes who you are becoming while you wait. God does not ignore broken prayers. He bends close to the brokenhearted. When life leaves us wounded, when disappointment crushes our spirit, and when the pain we carry feels too heavy to put into words, it is easy to believe our prayers are lost in the silence. We may convince ourselves that God has turned away, that he is too far, too distant, or too occupied to notice our trembling voice. Yet the truth is the complete opposite. God draws near in our pain. He is not a distant observer of our suffering, but a present comforter, a bending down like a loving father to hear even the faintest whisper of his child. Every sigh, every tear, every unspoken cry from the depth of a broken heart is gathered by him and held with tenderness. When the world sees weakness, he sees worship. When others may dismiss the prayers spoken through tears, God bends close to receive them, because his heart beats for the brokenhearted. The beauty of God's nearness is that he does not wait for polished words or perfect prayers. He does not require us to come to him strong, composed, and put together. In fact, it is often in the mess of our brokenness that he meets us most deeply. A broken-hearted prayer is not less powerful because of its weakness. It is more powerful because of its honesty. God bends close not to judge the trembling words, but to hold the broken soul that releases them. He leans into the pain. He inclines his ear to the desperate. And he chooses not to ignore the sound of fragile faith. What the enemy would use to convince us that God is silent becomes the very place where God reveals his compassion. Broken prayers are never wasted. They rise like incense before the throne, and they remind us that God is not moved by eloquence, but by authenticity. When Scripture says that God is close to the brokenhearted, it reveals his nature as one who cannot resist the cry of his children. Just as a parent rushes to comfort a child who is sobbing in the night, God rushes to those who are crushed in spirit. He bends low, not because he is obligated, but because his love compels him. His ear is tuned to the frequency of pain, and he does not despise a contrite heart. The very moments we think are evidence of abandonment are often the moments when he is carrying us most closely. Broken prayers may sound like groans, like silence, like words that do not make sense, yet God interprets them perfectly. The Spirit himself intercedes with groanings too deep for words, taking the fragments of our cries and aligning them with the heart of God. So even when we feel our words fail, heaven still hears, because God is attentive to what the world overlooks. The truth that God bends close to the brokenhearted also transforms how we view suffering. Pain has a way of isolating us, making us feel unseen and unheard. But when we pray in our brokenness, we discover that pain is not proof of God's absence, but a place where his presence becomes more real. He does not promise to shield us from every wound, but he promises to draw near in every wound. And in that nearness, something profound happens. Our brokenness becomes the meeting place of divine compassion and human frailty. God does not simply fix our pain instantly. He sits with us in it, strengthening us, comforting us, and slowly rebuilding what was shattered. Broken prayers invite Him into the raw spaces of our hearts, and He responds not with distance, but with intimacy. It is in those intimate moments of broken prayer that we often discover the depth of God's love in ways prosperity never reveals. When life is easy, prayer can sometimes feel like routine, but when the heart is broken, prayer becomes survival. And in that survival, we realize God is not ignoring us. He is bending closer than ever before. He meets us in the midnight tears, in the restless thoughts, in the sighs that never form into words. He bends close to catch the prayers we can't articulate, the ones we think are too weak or too messy to matter. But in His sight, those are the prayers that matter most because they come from a place of surrender. They are the prayers that declare, God, I have nothing left but You. And it is in those moments that His strength is made perfect in our weakness. God bending close to the brokenhearted is not just comfort, it is transformation. Every tear becomes a testimony, every cry becomes a seed of faith, and every broken prayer becomes a stepping stone toward healing. What feels like collapse is often the beginning of rebuilding. What feels like silence is often preparation for breakthrough. God does not discard the pieces of a shattered heart. He gathers them tenderly, reshaping them into something stronger, deeper, and more beautiful than before. Our broken prayers are not a sign of defeat, but an offering of trust, because it takes greater faith to pray in pain than it does to pray in prosperity. And when we dare to bring our brokenness before Him, He leans down to remind us that we are never abandoned, never ignored, and never unheard. When you pray with expectation, your focus shifts from what you lost to who can restore. Loss has a way of dominating our vision, consuming our thoughts, and anchoring our emotions in a place of grief, regret, or despair. When something precious is taken away, whether it be a relationship, an opportunity, a dream, or even peace of mind, the heart naturally gravitates toward what is missing. The weight of absence can cloud everything else, leaving us replaying the past and questioning the future. But expectation in prayer changes that perspective. It does not erase the reality of the loss, but it redirects the gaze of the heart away from the empty space toward the fullness of God. Expectation acknowledges what has been lost, but it refuses to let loss have the final word. It places the broken pieces into the hands of the One who is able to restore, redeem, and rebuild in ways we could never imagine. Instead of asking, why did this happen? Expectation begins to ask, what is God about to do through this? That shift is powerful because it pulls the heart out of despair and plants it in hope, reminding us that restoration is possible, not because of our strength, but because of God's unchanging character. Praying with expectation is not denial of pain. It is defiance of despair. It does not require you to pretend the loss never happened or to minimize its impact. Instead, it gives you permission to grieve while still believing. When you pray with expectation, you are saying, God, I may not understand why I lost this, but I trust You enough to believe You can restore. That act of trust realigns your focus. Rather than staring at the shattered pieces of what once was, you start to lift your eyes to the God who makes all things new. You move from mourning over what slipped through your fingers to marveling at what God can place back in your hands in His timing. This is not naive optimism, but a bold faith that dares to believe God is not finished. The enemy wants to use loss to trap you in a cycle of despair, but expectation in prayer breaks that cycle by pointing you back to the restorer of your soul. When you begin to focus on who can restore rather than what you lost, your heart enters a space of healing. Loss often breeds bitterness, resentment, and hopelessness because it keeps us anchored to the past. But expectation shifts the anchor forward, rooting it in God's future for you. You start to believe again that joy is possible, that peace can return, that love can be found, and that strength can rise even from the ruins. In this shift, the very act of praying with expectation becomes healing in itself. Prayer is no longer a ritual of repeating requests. It becomes a lifeline that keeps your soul tethered to hope. The moment you start expecting God to move, you stop obsessing over what you cannot change and start anticipating what only He can create. This shift does not happen overnight, but each prayer with expectation loosens the grip of loss and strengthens the grip of faith. Expectation also transforms the language of prayer. Without expectation, our prayers can sound like lament without hope, endless rehearsals of pain and sorrow. But with expectation, prayer becomes a declaration that God is able to restore what is broken, heal what is wounded, and replace what was lost with something greater. The words you speak in prayer begin to shift from, "I lost everything," to, "I trust that God is bringing something new." That shift in language reflects a shift in heart posture. Instead of praying as a victim of loss, you pray as a child of God who knows the Father is still in control. And that change in language is not just words. It becomes a source of strength for the soul. Speaking faith in prayer with expectation allows you to hear hope in your own voice, and that hope begins to rebuild what loss tried to destroy. Focusing on who can restore also brings clarity in seasons of waiting. Loss can create impatience, a longing for instant replacement or quick relief. But expectation understands that restoration is often a process. It trusts that God is not simply handing back what was lost, but is shaping something better, something fuller, something that aligns with His perfect will. That perspective allows you to endure seasons of waiting with faith instead of frustration. You stop measuring time by how long it has been since you lost something and start measuring it by how close you are to the restoration God is preparing. This shift allows peace to enter even before the restoration arrives, because you are no longer consumed with absence, but consumed with anticipation. And perhaps the most powerful part of praying with expectation is the way it transforms your identity. When you fixate on what you lost, you start to define yourself by the loss. You see yourself as the abandoned one, the rejected one, the failed one, the unlucky one. But when you focus on who can restore, you begin to define yourself by God's presence, His power, and His promises. You start to see yourself not as a victim of loss, but as a vessel of restoration. Your brokenness becomes the canvas for God's glory. Your story of loss becomes the soil where new life can grow. Expectation redefines you because it reminds you that your identity is not tied to what was taken away, but to the God who holds your future. And as you continue to pray with expectation, you discover that the restoration God provides is never a mere replacement. It is always greater, deeper, and more purposeful than what you thought you lost. God's answers may not come the way you imagine, but they always come with purpose. Prayer often begins with a vision in our mind of how we want God to respond. We imagine specific doors opening, certain people staying in our lives, particular opportunities unfolding exactly the way we dream. And when God doesn't answer in the way we scripted, disappointment creeps in, making us think He is silent or distant. But the truth is that God's answers are not bound by our imagination. They are bound by His wisdom. His perspective is higher than ours. His vision stretches further than our limited view. And His plans are intricately woven with eternal purpose. While we might desire immediate relief, God may choose delayed timing because He is developing endurance. While we might beg for something we think will complete us, God may withhold it because He knows it will eventually harm us. What feels like a denial is often a divine redirection. What seems like silence is often God preparing something greater behind the scenes. When you understand that God's answers always come with purpose, your heart learns to trust even when the outcome looks different than expected. This truth reshapes the way we interpret closed doors. A closed door is not always rejection. Sometimes it is God's protection. We might have prayed for that job, that relationship, that breakthrough, and when it didn't happen, our hearts broke under the weight of disappointment. But when you look back, you begin to see how God's no was actually a yes to something greater. The job you lost may have opened the path to a career aligned with your calling. The relationship that ended may have freed your heart to receive someone God handpicked for your future. The opportunity that slipped away may have cleared the space for something far beyond what you imagined. God's answers may not match your requests, but they always align with His purpose. His ways are higher than ours, and His purpose is not to indulge our every desire, but to fulfill His perfect plan for our lives. Sometimes God's answers come in ways that stretch our faith. We ask Him to remove the challenge, but He allows it to remain because He is using it to build resilience within us. We pray for Him to take away the storm, but He teaches us to walk on water in the middle of it. We plead for instant deliverance, but He teaches us to trust Him in the process. These answers don't fit the picture we imagined, but they fit perfectly into the purpose He is writing in our story. God is not only concerned with what we are praying for, He is also deeply invested in who we are becoming through the process. That is why His answers are always purposeful. They are shaping us, molding us, and preparing us for the future He has designed. The pain you prayed away may have been the very tool God used to birth perseverance. The delay you questioned may have been the preparation required for you to carry the blessing without being crushed by it. God's answers may be unexpected, but they are never wasted. Even in seasons of waiting, God's answers carry purpose. Waiting is not wasted time in His kingdom. It is shaping time. While we see waiting as a pause, God sees it as preparation. We may ask for immediate breakthrough, but God allows us to linger in the in-between because He is aligning the right people, the right place, and the right timing. We might think God is ignoring us, but He is actually arranging every detail with precision. If He were to give us the answer prematurely, it could destroy us rather than bless us. His purpose in the waiting is to strengthen our character, deepen our trust, and refine our vision so that when the answer finally comes, we are ready to steward it well. This shows that God's answers are not about convenience. They are about calling. He answers in ways that not only solve a temporary problem, but also propel us toward His eternal purpose. It is also important to remember that God's answers are not confined to yes or no. Sometimes His answer is not yet, which can be harder to accept than silence. But even the delay has purpose. Not yet teaches patience, builds endurance, and teaches us to trust God's timing rather than forcing our own. Other times, His answer looks nothing like what we requested, yet over time, we realize it was exactly what we needed. We may have prayed for restoration in one area, but God brought restoration in another. We may have asked Him to fix a situation, but instead He fixed our perspective. We may have begged Him to change someone else, but instead He changed us. These unexpected answers remind us that God's purpose is far greater than our plans. He is not a vending machine that dispenses exactly what we request. He is a loving Father who gives what is best, even when it doesn't look like what we asked for. God's answers always carry layers of purpose that unfold over time. What feels like confusion today often makes sense in hindsight. What we thought was unanswered prayer often turns out to be the very thing that positioned us for blessing. Every answer, whether it matched our request or not, is infused with divine intention. Nothing God allows or withholds is without purpose. He is too wise to make mistakes and too loving to be careless. His answers are not random, they are strategic. They are not cruel, they are compassionate. They may not come the way we imagine, but they always come wrapped in His purpose, designed to shape us, strengthen us, and draw us closer to Him. Expectation transforms prayer from ritual into relationship. For many people, prayer can easily become a routine, a set of words spoken out of obligation, habit, or tradition. It can become something we do because we feel we should, rather than something we engage in with our whole heart. When prayer is reduced to ritual, it feels distant and mechanical, almost like reciting lines from a script without truly connecting to the one we are speaking to. We go through the motions, but the fire of faith is absent. Yet when expectation enters prayer, everything changes. Expectation is what breathes life into prayer, turning it from a dry ritual into a living relationship. It is the confidence that the God you are speaking to is not only listening but also responding. It is the assurance that your words do not fade into the air, but rise into the heart of a loving Father who cares deeply about you. With expectation, prayer stops being a religious duty and becomes a relational dialogue. It shifts from monologue to conversation, from habit to encounter, from ritual to relationship. When you pray with expectation, you approach God differently. Ritual keeps you cautious, speaking words because you are supposed to, often without much thought to whether they matter. But expectation fills you with boldness because you know your prayers have weight in heaven. You are not speaking to an indifferent being, but to a God who delights in his children. Expectation makes you believe that when you whisper your fears, he listens. When you cry out in pain, he feels. When you declare his promises, he responds. This creates intimacy. You are not simply talking into the void. You are leaning into the heart of God, and he bends close to listen. That intimacy builds relationship, and relationship fuels faith. Suddenly, prayer is no longer about reciting words to check off a box. It is about connecting with the creator of the universe, who longs to meet you where you are. Expectation also transforms the tone of your prayers. Ritual prayers often sound like rehearsed lines, repetitive phrases spoken without depth. But when expectation is present, prayer becomes personal, specific, and alive. You begin to pour out your heart, not because you are supposed to, but because you believe someone is actually listening. You confess your struggles honestly, you express gratitude sincerely, and you share your dreams boldly. Expectation removes the mask of performance and invites authenticity. This honesty draws you closer to God, because he does not desire perfection in your words, but sincerity in your heart. The more honest your prayers become, the deeper the relationship grows. You stop trying to impress God with phrases, and you start inviting him into the real places of your life. That openness allows him to meet you in ways ritual never could. Another way expectation shifts prayer from ritual to relationship is through anticipation. Ritual prayer often ends without much thought. You pray, you close your eyes, you say amen, and then you go about your day without expecting much to change. But when you pray with expectation, you finish praying with a sense of anticipation, looking for how God will move. You begin to watch for signs of his hand at work, for answers that may come in unexpected forms, for opportunities he may be preparing. That posture of anticipation keeps you alert to his presence in everyday life, making prayer an ongoing conversation rather than a single event. Relationship is built not just in speaking, but in listening and watching, and expectation trains your heart to do both. You become sensitive to the ways God is answering, guiding, and comforting, and in that sensitivity, your bond with him deepens. Expectation also brings consistency to prayer. Ritual prayer can feel burdensome, something you struggle to maintain because it lacks life. But when you experience prayer as a relationship, you no longer see it as a duty. You see it as a desire. Just as you want to spend time with someone you love and trust, expectation makes you want to spend time with God. It becomes less about, I have to pray, and more about, I can't wait to talk to him. This shift strengthens your consistency because prayer stops being something you check off your list and starts being something your soul craves. You turn to him in the morning, not just out of obligation, but out of expectation that he will guide your day. You talk to him throughout the day, not just as a practice, but as a way to stay connected. That ongoing dialogue builds depth in your relationship, making prayer not just something you do, but part of who you are. Even in seasons of silence, expectation maintains relationship. Ritual prayer falters when answers don't come quickly because it lacks depth. But expectation keeps you anchored, even when you don't hear what you want to hear. Expectation trusts that God is listening, even if he is not speaking in the way you anticipated. It trusts that silence does not mean absence, and delay does not mean denial. This trust keeps the relationship steady, teaching you that prayer is not transactional. It's transformational. God may not always answer the way you imagined, but with expectation you trust His timing, His wisdom, and His plan. That trust strengthens your relationship because it is built on faith, not feelings. Ultimately, expectation takes prayer beyond ritual by shifting your mindset from performing for God to communing with Him. It teaches you to come not with empty repetition, but with confident faith. It allows prayer to become the place where you experience His love, hear His guidance, and grow in His presence. It turns the act of speaking into the art of connecting, the routine of praying into the reality of encountering, and the duty of ritual into the delight of relationship. A broken heart in the hands of God becomes the birthplace of new strength. Brokenness is something every person experiences at some point in life, whether through loss, betrayal, disappointment, or shattered dreams. When the heart is broken, it feels fragile, weak, and incapable of moving forward. The pain of brokenness can make you feel as though life has stopped. As though your strength has drained out of you, and as though nothing can restore what has been lost. But when you take that brokenness and place it in the hands of God, something extraordinary begins to happen. God does not waste pain, He transforms it. He does not discard the pieces of a shattered heart. He gathers them carefully, holds them tenderly, and begins to rebuild them with His love, His grace, and His power. And in that rebuilding, new strength is born. The kind of strength that does not come from your own willpower or determination, but from the deep, sustaining presence of God working in the midst of your weakness. A broken heart is often the very place where dependence on God is born. When life is smooth, it is easy to lean on your own abilities, your own plans, and your own strength. But when the heart is crushed, self-reliance collapses, and that collapse makes space for God's strength to enter. It is in brokenness that you discover you cannot carry yourself, but you also discover you do not have to, because God is carrying you. His word promises that His strength is made perfect in weakness. And nowhere is that more evident than in the life of someone who has surrendered their broken heart to Him. The very cracks that once represented loss and pain become the places where His grace seeps in, filling the soul with resilience that cannot be explained by human effort. This strength is not about ignoring the pain or pretending it never happened. It is about letting God transform the pain into a platform for His power. When your heart is in God's hands, brokenness becomes a teacher. It teaches humility because it reminds you that you are not invincible and that you need the one who created you. It teaches compassion because once you have walked through pain, you are more able to understand and comfort others who are hurting. It teaches endurance because you learn to keep walking even when the path feels heavy beneath your feet. Every lesson that comes from brokenness is shaping a new strength within you. A strength rooted not in pride or self-sufficiency, but in the steadfast love of God. The heartbreak that once felt like the end becomes the soil in which patience, wisdom, and resilience grow. And all of it happens not because the pain disappeared, but because you placed it in the hands of the one who knows how to redeem it. The strength that comes from a broken heart in God's hands is also unshakable because it is built on experience. It is one thing to know in theory that God is faithful, but it is another to experience His faithfulness in the middle of your deepest valley. When you have felt the weight of despair and then felt God lifting you out of it, your faith takes on a depth that cannot be shaken by future storms. You no longer just repeat that God is close to the brokenhearted. You know it because you have lived it. And that lived experience becomes a well of strength you can draw from when new challenges arise. It also becomes a testimony that strengthens others, proving that brokenness is not the end, but the beginning of a deeper walk with God. The new strength born in His hands is not only for you, it becomes a source of encouragement for those who are still in their own season of brokenness. Another way God brings strength from a broken heart is through His ability to restore what was lost in ways we never imagined. Sometimes he restores by giving back what was taken, but often he restores by giving something better, deeper, or more aligned with his purpose. The process of waiting for that restoration builds endurance, and the restoration itself fills the heart with renewed joy. That joy is different from what you had before because it has been tested in the fire of pain and has emerged stronger. It is not fragile joy that depends on circumstances. It is anchored joy that depends on God's faithfulness. That kind of joy fuels a strength that allows you to face the future with courage, knowing that the same God who carried you through one season of brokenness will carry you through whatever comes next. In the hands of God, brokenness becomes transformation. He does not merely put the pieces back together as they were before. He reshapes them into something new, something stronger, something more beautiful. Just as clay in the hands of a potter can be reshaped into a vessel of greater use, your broken heart in his hands can be molded into a testimony of resilience, faith, and hope. This transformation is not about forgetting the pain, but about redeeming it. The scars remain, but in God's hands. Scars are not signs of defeat. They are signs of survival, reminders of the strength that was birthed in weakness. Each scar becomes evidence that God's grace was greater than the pain. And each crack becomes a place where his light shines through more clearly than ever before. The broken heart that once felt like a symbol of weakness becomes the very place where strength is birthed because it is no longer held by fragile human hands, but by the steady, faithful hands of God who never wastes a tear, never overlooks a cry, and never abandons his children in their brokenness.